When I moved into my new place, I thought I was just getting a quiet neighborhood. I didn't expect two women next door, graceful, confident, and far older than me, to change everything. And the night one of them laughed and said, "We don't care about age, only stamina," was the moment I realized this wasn't just neighborly friendship anymore. When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought of it as temporary, a stopover in my life, not the kind of place that would make stories worth retelling. The street was quiet, the kind lined with tidy hedges and porches that looked lived in but not showy. I was in my mid-20s, still figuring myself out, carrying boxes up a creaky set of steps with more energy than certainty. It was on that first afternoon, sweaty and tired, that I noticed the house next door. Noticed them. Two women were on the porch, leaning against the railing as if it belonged more to them than the wood itself. Both looked somewhere in their early 40s, though in entirely different ways. The first had a softness to her presence, a smile that unfolded slowly, like she was letting you in on something private. Her hair was pulled back casually, a few loose strands catching the late sun. She wore a light summer dress that shifted in the breeze, and when she turned to greet me, it felt as though she had been expecting me all along. The second carried herself differently, not unfriendly, but sharper, more precise. She wore sunglasses even though the sun was dipping, her posture straight, chin slightly lifted as though she were testing the measure of this new neighbor before deciding whether to approve. Her beauty wasn't just in her face but in the quiet authority she seemed to carry, the kind that doesn't demand attention but naturally receives it. Together, they were magnetic. Not in a dramatic, cinematic sense, but in the way some people simply hold a space. The air felt heavier where they stood. I caught myself slowing down, pretending to adjust a box just so I could observe them without appearing obvious. Their laughter drifted over the hedge between our yards. It wasn't loud, more of a low ripple, the kind that made you wonder what had been said, what intimacy you hadn't been part of. The scent of jasmine hung in the air, theirs, I would later learn, from a climbing vine they tended carefully along the porch beams. When I finally looked up, the one with the softer smile raised her hand in a small wave. Simple, casual, but my pulse jumped in a way that felt almost embarrassing. The other tilted her head, just slightly, as if amused by my hesitation. She removed her sunglasses, and her eyes, steady, clear, landed on me for one deliberate moment before she slipped them back into place. All I managed was a nod and a mumbled hello, my voice lost somewhere between fatigue and nerves. They returned it with warmth that felt more intentional than polite. That night, as I unpacked boxes and tried to make the new house feel like mine, I kept hearing their laughter through the open window. Not intrusive, just present. I told myself it was nothing, just neighbors. Still, as I turned off the light, I caught myself wondering about the two women next door, and why, even on the very first day, they felt like a story I wanted to follow. It didn't take long for that first polite wave across the hedge to turn into something more. A few days after moving in, I came home to find the two women sitting on their porch with a pot of coffee between them. The softer one, whose laugh I'd already memorized, lifted the pot like an invitation. "You look like you could use a break," she said, eyes warm, voice calm but playful. I hesitated at the bottom of their steps, backpack still slung over one shoulder. The sharper one rested her chin on her hand, studying me in a way that felt both amused and measuring. Finally, she tilted her head toward the empty chair beside them. "Sit. Unless you're afraid of strong coffee." I wasn't, though my nerves made me feel like I should be. I climbed the steps, and the scent of coffee mingled with jasmine from their garden. One of them poured, sliding the mug across the small wooden table. Her fingers brushed mine as I took it, quick and light, but enough to leave a faint heat in my palm. The conversation started simple: where I'd come from, what I was doing here, the kind of small talk neighbors are supposed to have. But with them, it felt different. They weren't just filling silence, they were listening. One leaned in, elbows on the table, eyes steady on mine as if nothing else mattered. The other teased me, laughing when I stumbled over an answer, but her laughter didn't cut, it softened. It became clear how seamlessly they moved together, their sentences finishing one another's, their glances carrying meaning that needed no words. I felt caught between them, not uncomfortably, but in a way that made me hyper-aware of my own presence, like stepping into a rhythm that had been set long before me. The porch itself seemed to hum with ease, the wood creaked beneath shifting chairs, the clink of mugs punctuated stories, and every so often a breeze carried the faint rustle of the jasmine vines. I found myself laughing more than I expected, the sound of my own voice lighter, less guarded. At one point, as I told them about my move, one reached out and rested her hand briefly on my forearm. Just a simple gesture, encouragement maybe, but her touch lingered half a beat longer than necessary. I felt it, not just on my skin, but somewhere deeper, like an unspoken question left hanging in the air. When I finally stood to leave, both rose too, walking me to the steps. "Don't be a stranger," the softer one said, her smile a shade gentler than before. The other added, "We're almost always out here. You'll learn that." I walked back to my house with my chest unexplainably lighter, the echo of their voices still circling in my head. For the first time since moving in, the place didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt alive. And as I unpacked another box that night, I realized I wasn't thinking about furniture or dishes or what still needed fixing. I was thinking about the two women next door, and the way their attention had made me feel like I belong. It's strange how quickly routines form. What began as casual greetings soon became threads weaving me into their days. Sometimes it was small things, like finding one of them in the driveway struggling with heavy grocery bags, and me instinctively jogging over to help. Other times it was slower, like evenings when I'd pass their porch and they'd call out for me to sit, as though my place there had been reserved all along. The first time I carried groceries inside, I noticed how different they were even in the way they moved through a kitchen. The softer one hummed as she unpacked, barefoot, hair loose and falling into her face as she stacked fruit into a bowl. The sharper one moved with precision, sliding jars into cupboards, wiping the counter as if she couldn't stand for anything to be out of order. Their contrasts shouldn't have fit together, but somehow it created a balance I couldn't look away from. One afternoon, we ended up walking their dog together. It was a golden retriever, excitable, its leash tugging against my grip as we strolled through the tree-lined street. They walked close, one on each side of me, our shoulders brushing every so often as the dog darted left or right. At first, I thought I imagined the deliberate nearness, but when the softer one let her arms swing lightly against mine, and didn't pull away, I knew it wasn't accidental. The conversations grew more personal in those walks and porch talks. They spoke of work, the exhaustion of long hours, the frustrations they rarely admitted to anyone else. One evening, when the air was warm and the street lamps flickered on, the sharper one leaned back in her chair and confessed she dreaded going inside at night. "Too quiet," she murmured, eyes unfocused on the darkening street. For a moment, her composure slipped, and I saw something raw there, loneliness she rarely allowed to surface. That night I couldn't shake it. These women, who seemed so confident, so unshakable, carried their own silences too. Then there was the moment with the glass. We were on the porch again, a warm evening with iced tea sweating down tall glasses. As she handed one to me, her fingers brushed against mine, not a clumsy accident but a deliberate pause, her eyes catching mine at the exact moment of touch. It lasted no more than a second, but it sent something electric down my arm, rooting me in place. She smiled faintly, as if daring me to acknowledge it, but I couldn't. I just held the glass tighter, pretending it was nothing, even as my heart stumbled in my chest. The laughter, the walks, the quiet admissions, all of it built something I hadn't expected. They were no longer just neighbors with charming smiles. They were becoming a part of my days, threading into my routines, slipping under my skin in ways I didn't quite know how to name. And yet, beneath the warmth, there was a tension. Something hovering between us, waiting. It happened on one of those evenings that felt too perfect to be planned. The air was warm but not stifling, the kind of night where the world seems to exhale. I had drifted onto their porch after dinner, as I often did by then. The string lights above glowed faintly, their bulbs softened by little halos of dust, and the three of us sat around a low table with glasses of wine sweating against the wood. The conversation rolled easy, stories from my awkward college days, tales of their travels, light teasing traded back and forth. Their laughter had become familiar to me, but that night it felt closer, more enveloping, almost like it wrapped itself around me instead of just reaching my ears. At one point, the softer one leaned back in her chair, her hair falling loose across her shoulder, and said, "I swear, you keep up with us better than most men our age." The sharper one smirked, raising her glass. "Better than any men our age." Then she glanced at me, eyes sharp but playful. "Honestly, we don't care about age, only stamina." The words landed like a spark. The softer one broke into laughter, the sound ringing out across the porch, but the sharper one didn't laugh right away. She just held my gaze, lips curved in a smile that was both mischievous and deliberate. I felt heat rise in my chest, my pulse quickening. I tried to play it off, fumbling with my glass, laughing nervously as if it were just a joke. "Well," I managed, "guess that's one test I haven't studied for." The softer one reached across and touched my wrist lightly, as if to soothe me. "Don't mind her," she said with a teasing smile. "She likes to push buttons." But the way her eyes lingered on mine told me she wasn't dismissing it entirely either. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged. I became hyper-aware of everything, the faint creak of the porch swing shifting in the breeze, the warmth of her hand still near mine, the sharpness of the other's gaze softening just enough to blur into something else. I wanted to say something clever, to match their banter, but the truth was, I couldn't think past the weight of what had just been implied. Even dressed as humor, it had cracked open a door I wasn't sure any of us could close again. Eventually, the moment slipped into laughter again, the tension dissolving into another round of playful stories and clinking glasses. But underneath the surface, something had changed. The porch lights still glowed, the jasmine still scented the air, but the atmosphere carried a new electricity. Later that night, lying in bed with the window open, I replayed it over and over, her voice, that teasing yet serious tone, the way the other woman's laughter didn't quite erase the look in her eyes. It was only a joke, maybe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a joke. And that realization left me staring at the ceiling long after the night had gone quiet, heart racing with the possibility of what might come next. After that night, everything felt different. Nothing had actually happened, no lines crossed, no promises made, but the air between us carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Every glance seemed to linger a little longer, every laugh held a trace of something deeper. And yet, instead of pulling me closer, it pushed me back. I found myself hesitating, taking longer to answer their invitations, making excuses to stay home, convincing myself I needed space. The truth was, I was afraid. Not of them, but of what it would mean if I let myself step into whatever this was becoming. The age gap pressed against my thoughts like a constant drumbeat. What would people say if they saw me with them? What would my friends think? My parents? Neighbors already glanced too long when they saw us talking on the porch, and I could almost hear the whispers forming. One evening, I gave in and stopped by. They were sitting inside this time, candles lit on the coffee table, the room warm with soft amber light. I took a seat across from them, feeling the weight of their eyes. Conversation started, but I was distracted, quieter than usual. It didn't take long for one of them to notice. The sharper one leaned forward, wine glass in hand, her tone careful but cutting. "You've been avoiding us." I froze, fumbling for an answer. The softer one reached across, her fingers brushing mine lightly before resting on my knee. Her touch was gentle, grounding. "Are you ashamed to be seen with us?" she asked softly, almost as if the question cost her something to say. The words hit hard. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. Ashamed? No. That wasn't it. But the fear of perception, the weight of other people's judgments, had been louder than I wanted to admit. I finally managed. "It's not you. It's just. I keep thinking about what people might say. About the difference between us." My voice felt too small for the heaviness of the moment. For a second, silence stretched. The sharper one swirled her glass, eyes sharp but not unkind. "If you're worried about gossip, you'll be waiting your whole life to live," she said. The softer one squeezed my knee gently, her warmth seeping into me. "We're not asking for promises," she whispered. "Just honesty." Something broke open inside me then. I admitted haltingly, "I'm not afraid of being with you. I'm afraid of the world looking at us and deciding it's wrong. But when I'm here," I looked at both of them, feeling my throat tighten. "When I'm here, I don't want to be anywhere else." The softer one leaned in, pressing a light kiss to my cheek. Not lingering, just enough to anchor me. The sharper one set her glass down and finally smiled, small, but real. And in that quiet room, with their presence close and steady, I realized something. Fear might always be there, but so was this. And maybe the choice wasn't about age or perception at all. Maybe it was about whether I was brave enough to accept what was right in front of me. The night it happened, the rain came suddenly, not a drizzle, but a storm that seemed to sweep across the whole neighborhood in minutes. I had just finished dinner when I noticed them outside, struggling to bring in cushions from the porch as the wind tossed them around. Instinct moved me before thought did. I slipped into my jacket and ran across the yard, rain soaking through my shirt almost immediately. Together we wrestled the porch into order, pulling cushions inside, gathering glassware, tying back the swinging vine that threatened to snap. The three of us laughed breathlessly in the chaos, hair plastered to our faces, shoes squeaking against the wet wood. By the time we carried the last of it inside, we were dripping, half shivering, and laughing like children who'd gotten away with mischief. "Sit," the softer one said, tossing me a towel. "You'll catch cold." We ended up in their living room, all three crowded on the wide sofa. A fire had already been lit earlier in the evening, its crackle competing with the pounding of the storm outside. The contrast was startling, cold rain clinging to us, warmth from the fire pulling us closer. One of them fetched a blanket, and without asking, spread it across all our laps, the fabric heavy and soft, pulling us into a single circle of warmth. It was innocent at first, shared laughter, steam rising from mugs of tea they quickly brewed, shoulders pressed together simply because the sofa was small. But as the minutes stretched, the closeness deepened. The softer one leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, strands of damp hair brushing my neck. My pulse raced, but I didn't move away. The sharper one sat on my other side, her posture still straight, but every so often I caught her glance shifting toward me, less guarded now, her eyes reflecting firelight instead of distance. The dog curled at our feet, sighing contentedly, as if the night had settled into its natural shape. Outside, rain hammered against the windows. Inside, it felt as though time had slowed, the world reduced to this small, glowing room and the three of us pressed together. At one point, the softer one adjusted the blanket, pulling it higher over me. Her hand lingered at my chest for just a second too long, her touch warm even through the fabric. My breath caught. The sharper one noticed. I knew she did, because her lips curved in the faintest, knowing smile before she leaned back, her shoulder brushing firmly against mine, claiming her place in the closeness. No words were spoken, but something passed between us, an unspoken agreement, a silent acknowledgement that what we had been circling around for weeks was no longer just suggestion. It was here, alive, sitting between us and binding us together. The storm outside raged on, but in that room, with their warmth pressed against me, I felt something steadier than I ever had before. For the first time, it wasn't about what people might think, or what lines we were crossing. It was simply about belonging. And in that moment, I belonged completely. In the weeks that followed, my routines changed without me even planning them. My house still stood next door, with its half-unpacked boxes and quiet rooms, but more often than not, I found myself crossing the yard in the evenings, pulled by the glow of their porch lights or the faint sound of their laughter drifting through the night air. It wasn't dramatic, no big declarations, no sudden transformations. It was smaller than that, quieter. But in its quietness, it felt real. We cooked together sometimes, our elbows bumping in their kitchen as we moved around each other like we had been doing it for years. The sharper one taught me how to properly dice onions without nearly losing a finger, her hand guiding mine on the knife handle, her breath warm against my cheek as she leaned close. The softer one slipped behind me as I stirred a pot, resting her chin lightly on my shoulder for a moment, her arms brushing against my waist before pulling away with a smile. We walked together, too, down streets glowing in late summer light, the dog bounding ahead. One of them would slip her hand into mine, the other brushing close enough that her shoulder pressed against me as we moved. Neighbors noticed, of course. I caught their glances, the way conversations paused when we passed. But the women didn't flinch, didn't shrink. Their confidence held me steady, and slowly, the whispers mattered less and less. Inside, there were softer moments. Rainy afternoons when we sat tangled under blankets, reading separate books but sharing the same space. Nights when exhaustion melted us together on the sofa, their heads leaning against me as the fire burned low. Every touch carried weight, a hand slipping over mine, a cheek resting briefly on my shoulder, a kiss pressed against my temple or cheek, so gentle it felt almost like a promise. There were still moments of doubt, flickers of that old voice in my head that whispered about age, about difference, about the world outside. But each time, one of them seemed to sense it, grounding me with something simple, a hand on my chest, steady and warm, or a look that said, without words, "You're exactly where you should be." One evening, we walked together at dusk, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold. The dog trotted beside us, the air cooling with the promise of autumn. One held my hand, the other brushed against my arm, and as we passed beneath the soft glow of a street lamp, I saw our three shadows stretching across the pavement, long and intertwined. It struck me then, this wasn't temporary. This wasn't just neighbors or chance encounters. This was a home, built not from walls or addresses but from presence, from laughter, from the way their hands anchored me when the world felt uncertain. We weren't conventional, maybe. We weren't what people expected. But as the softer one leaned in and kissed my cheek, and the sharper one squeezed my hand firmly, I realized something simple and undeniable. We didn't need to be. Because whatever this was, it was ours. And in that moment, I couldn't imagine wanting anything else.